So hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, hello and warm welcome to very first installment of the Urban Futures Hub series. My name is Leila Niamir, a research scholar and lead of the Urban Future Hub at the International Institute for Applied System Analyzing, IIASA in Austria. And I'm very much delighted to open and moderate this session. We recently launched the Urban Futures Hub at IIASA, a cutting-edge research initiative focused on how cities and urban systems can lead climate change mitigation and adaptation from local to global scale. This hub brings together experts from various disciplines, both within and beyond IIASA, to collaborate on assessing cities and climate change across diverse domain and scale. Today, I'm excited to kick off the Urban Futures Hub series, where we'll present and discuss key topics, knowledge gaps, and research challenges around cities and climate change. In this first installment, we will explore digitalization and green technologies for sustainable urban development, featuring insights from one of our ongoing projects, the CCICED Special Policy Study. This project provides policy recommendation for promoting digitalization and green technologies for sustainable development. It involves more than 440 scientists from various fields, along with industry experts and policymakers from China, Germany, Austria, and the UK. We are currently in a final stage of the second report. We are conducting case studies visits in different cities across China and Europe, including hosting delegates last week here at Vienna for the discussion. Without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished speakers for today. First, we have a Professor Dirk Massner, President of the German Environment Agency. Professor Massner is an internationally recognized expert on globalization, global governance, transformation pathways to sustainability, decarbonization of the global economy, sustainability and digital change, and international cooperation and societal change. He has been a member of several high-ranking policy advisory councils, including the German Advisory Council on Global Change and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Today, Professor Massner will present the latest study on digitalization and green technology conducted through this CCICED project over the past 2 years. Our next speaker is Dr. Keyvan Riahi, the Director of the Energy, Climate, Environment Program at IIASA. He has extensive experience in field of climate change, sustainable energy systems, and policy analyzing. Dr. Riahi has been working with Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, since the late 1990s and provides policy advice both at international and national levels. He is also a member of the Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change of the European Union and also the Scientific Advisory Board of the Vienna in Austria. Today, Dr. Riahi will provide remarks on a broader perspective of the digitalization and green technologies, discussing both their positive and negative impacts. Very welcome, Dirk and Keyvan, and thanks for accepting my invitation for very first series. A few housekeeping notes before we start. We will first hear two presentations from our two speakers, about 25 to 30 minutes, followed up by a 20-minute discussion. The Q&A box is open from now, so feel free to add your questions as we proceed through the presentation. You also have opportunity to rank other questions in a box. Accordingly, I will prioritize questions based on their popularity at the end and ask our speakers. Now, let us hear from our esteemed speakers. Professor Massner, floor is yours.
Wonderful. So first of all, thank you very much to you, Leila, for inviting me, and thank you very much for having the opportunity to discuss with both of you and with the auditorium. I do have some slides which I prepared, so let's get started the slides. Okay, so this is the overarching title, the overarching theme we are interested in. the fundamental drivers of global change. On the one hand side, the sustainability transformation, which we are all working on, and then the digital transformation with very profound impacts. And this is the framework which we are working on in this task force. And on my next slide, I will look at the very big picture. If you look here at the diagram, what I would like to highlight is that I see three dynamics towards a digital sustainable society. The first one is hopefully the one in which we are, where we try to use digital tools for sustainability, the first dynamic. But digital innovations and digital dynamics are more than only tools and instruments. They will restructure very profoundly our overall society and economy. Kewan, you will talk about this later on. And therefore, it's not only about digitalization for sustainability, it's also the challenge to think how a sustainable digitalized society and economy actually might look like. And then the third dynamic goes, I would say, even further, because the third dynamic is about the future of us as human beings. This is something which we have been discussing in our task force also. We are creating now technologies which are producing knowledge, large scale, very often high quality. And our competitive advantage until now in our evolution during the last 300,000 years as Homo sapiens has been that we are the most knowledgeable species on Earth. This might change. So this will have implications when we think about the future of the concept of human-centered development. So let's go to the next slide. And this slide is focusing on the diagram which we have been producing with our first study. Leila, you mentioned we are now in the second study already. In the first study, we looked at digital innovations in different industries. And what I'm putting here at the forefront is that we focused on what we called digital capabilities. So we decided not to go into specific technologies, which you are seeing on the left-hand side here, but we argued that all these technologies, if you look at their functions, are being translated into specific digital capabilities, which now confront us with the new quality of technological infrastructure. So look at the sense and monitor dimension, the connecting dimension, the trace, track and verifying dimension, the optimize, model and simulating dimension, and so forth. So our main argument is that these kind of digital capabilities, which we need to mobilize, there is no automatism between the technologies and how we use those. But if we mobilize these digital capabilities, we can use those for better organizing the sustainability transformation. This is our main focus here. So the main argument is that with these kind of digital capabilities, we are better equipped to make these pathways towards climate neutrality than without those. But there are risks. I think Kewan will talk about this. And we need to mobilize those. So the governance structure of all of that is very important. Let's move to the next slide. On the next slide, we see the basic conceptual framework of our recent study. In this recent study, we are not focusing on the industries as we did in the first study. We are focusing on cities for two main reasons. The first reason is that global urban population will double during the next 25 years to come or so. So as you all know, climate neutrality is related to that because 70% of all greenhouse gases are related to cities. So if we double a global urban population without dramatically decarbonizing the cities, we will fail. This is the first point why cities are so important. The second element is that on the ground in cities, well-being, economic development, digital infrastructures and innovations are coming together. So we would like to understand how we can combine digital innovations, not only in the sense of doing climate neutrality better, but also creating wealth for people, people-centered development, people-centered AI, people-centered climate neutrality strategies. This is what we are interested in. And we have four main questions, which you can see here on the left-hand side. I'm not going through those in detail. The main question here is how to use the newly emerging digital infrastructures in the cities we are looking at to push on the right-hand side, you see the goals, to push our pathways towards our goals further. And we are doing empirical research. Kewan, you are probably talking about one of these nexus areas. We have three of those. We look on the city, people inclusiveness, the well-being nexus, and trying to understand how this is being influenced by digital innovations. We look at cities, economy, and energy. Kewan is going to look at this deeper in a second. And in the third nexus field, we are trying to understand the city, environment, climate nexus in itself. And as you can see here, we have leverage points, urban governance, urban infrastructure, urban planning, knowledge systems and the access to knowledge systems at the local levels, the participation and soft governance mechanisms, and last but not least, monitoring systems and learning mechanisms. So this is how we look at cities, and this is the overall framework of our study. And in the next, on the next slide, I'm looking a bit more detailed on the sustainable on the digital infrastructure, because digital infrastructure is being interpreted very broadly in the literature. We focus on 5 major cornerstones of then what we call then the digital infrastructure, which is also relevant for urban infrastructures in this field. And you can see that we distinguish data centers and cloud architectures, networks and grids, hardware and hardware devices and the Internet of Things, the software dimension, and then the data and the data flows. And AI is part of this cornerstones of the digital infrastructure, how we understand it. And then in the next step, and on the next slide, we combine this with our digital capabilities, because this kind of digital infrastructure is the basis of what then opens us the door to the digital capabilities. Let's call this for a second the digital innovation space. And the digital infrastructure stuff, the 5 cornerstones, this is about investments and priority in investments. This is what you can see and measure and look at in cities. The capabilities have to be mobilized by the leverage points I talked about beforehand. So on the next slide then, we combine these different strands of thinking, which I just talked about. And what I would like to emphasize here is that if you move into the cities now, and we have been looking at Beijing and others in China, at Helsinki and Vienna and the Ruhr district in Germany in Europe, if you look at this basic structure here, what I would like to emphasize is that the combination of digital infrastructures and digital capabilities, so what I call the innovation space, this is influencing the nexus systems we are looking at. In Kewan, we'll talk about the city economy energy nexus and how this interrelates with the digital infrastructures and the digital capabilities. It influences also the leverage points, so the way we organize change, actually. And you would like to understand better how we can improve organizing change and transformation based on the combination of digital infrastructures and digital capabilities, so the digital innovation space. On the next slide, I'm moving forward already to tentative policy recommendations, because Kewan, you will dive into one of these nexus fields and go into empirical work on what we have been seeing there. What I would like to demonstrate to you are 5 overall arching tentative policy recommendations, because we have still 6 weeks in front of us. We are now working on the concrete recommendations and conclusions based on the empirical work which we have been doing in these nexus areas, which I highlighted, in the case studies which I mentioned, based on indicator systems, which I have been talking about. So I'm looking now at overarching tentative policy recommendations. I have 5 of those to show you into which direction we are actually thinking. So the first one seems to be so simple, so plausible, but it is very fundamental and not business as usual. This means that very often it's not happening. So our first recommendation is that cities who are moving into the direction of trying to systematically align and link smart city approaches to the AI and digital perspective with sustainability and climate neutrality approaches need a long-term strategy. If they don't need a long-term strategy, which gives them direction for their decisions, they will get lost in complexity, because we see that many cities are doing many things into many directions. And this does not create pathways, And then we have been understanding and learning that developing a long-term, valid digital infrastructure in cities is one thing, but then you are confronted with disruptions and innovations which are coming from now to tomorrow. Imagine the ChatGPT discussion which we had during the last 2 years or so, which has been changing our thinking. So getting all of this into one direction and developing a pathway, a long-term vision is absolutely needed. And in many cities, even those ones which have been fascinating us, because many things are happening there, do not have this kind of long-term vision still. So the second element is then we need systemic change. And when we talk about systemic change, we see three major shifts. And Stefan, could you take the next slide? We are going backwards afterwards to see the three systemic shifts. And these three systemic shifts are the following. What needs to be done is, on the one hand side, the first shift, we have to align digitalization strategies with sustainable development concepts systematically. So what we have been seeing in the 5, 6, 7 cities which we have been visiting, and then in the literature, is that most of the cities which we are now in contact with are having smart city concepts and climate neutrality concepts. From time to time, the teams around these two concepts are interacting. Aligning these different strategies fundamentally is something which we see very seldomly only. So this alignment concept seems to be very plausible, but it is not happening in many cities still. So a lot of work needs to be done in this regard. The second element seems to be even more clear, but we haven't seen it not even in one city, K1, and I remember it correctly, in Leila, because we are working together in all these cities. No, the second element is that digital innovations, AI, all of that is creating many opportunities, but a lot of that is very resource intensive and related to high energy consumption. So greening the digital infrastructure is something which we need to look at from the beginning in order to avoid problems, further problems. And we haven't seen clear strategies in this regard in most cities. The cities are much more concentrated on the third element, which is how to use these digital infrastructures for innovation. This is very clear in the head of most actors involved in the field. But the more simple the shift number 2 and shift number 1, is something which is still not developed as it needed to be to get a systemic shift towards sustainability in smart cities. So let's go back to the former slide to look at the third element. Then we are reflecting in our study about the different dimensions of innovations driven by AI and digital processes. And the important thing is here that we do not have a narrow technology-oriented approach, but we distinguish technological changes for sustainability as an innovation dimension, institutional and governance innovations as a second dimension, social innovations, so inclusiveness, participations, knowledge systems, access to knowledge systems, new patterns of learning, infrastructural innovations, automatic driving, automated decision-making flows, and so forth. And then the last point might astonish you. It's about beautiful cities. It's about culture. It's about what we call Eigenart, so what makes cities specific. And in our understanding of innovations, we need this kind of systemic approach to get AI and digital innovations coming together with human-centered innovation. And we are looking for best practices in these different dimensions of our innovation space, which I'm talking about here now. And we are also looking for patterns which we might see comparing the different cities we are working on. So the fourth element is then something which is related to risks. Laila, at the beginning, you talked about the opportunities already of AI and digital innovations, but you also talked about risks. And we do have this in mind, and we discuss it. And the point is that we will reflect, or we are reflecting already, about a new set of sustainability goals, which is related to AI and the digital innovations itself. So this is related to the second dynamic I talked about at the very beginning. So we should not only work with the SDGs, which we have been decided upon in 2015, we need to think about new sets of goals related to the new types of technological infrastructures and spheres which we are currently creating. And you have on the slide here only 2 examples in which direction we are thinking. The first one is that we would like to have an AI which is not undermining the agency and autonomy of people, but supporting the agency and the autonomy of people. We also see in many studies that these new dimensions of change are related to isolation of people. So how can we avoid this? So we are thinking about a new type, a new generation of sustainability goals, which are related to the newly emerging technological sphere, which we are having in mind. I'm coming to the end, Leila, and I do need 2 more minutes. Our fifth element, which we have in terms of policy recommendations on this meta level, is being created about the human body. And Stefan, if you would go to the human body slide, which I think is then the next one. So we started to play with the terminologies which we have been finding in the literature. And on the top of everything, we find that what is new is that data multiplied with high-speed data centers, multiplied with technological capabilities, this results then in better human progress and human-centered development. And we are not convinced that this only cognitively oriented approach, in China, the terminology when it comes to digital infrastructures in city is about the urban brain. So the idea that what we are actually improving here is cognitive levels of change. And with this body stuff here, we are arguing into the following direction. We think that with AI, we can support the human brain. We can develop new types of knowledge. We can develop new types of cognitive frameworks which help us to do the transformation better. We also, the mouth is missing here still. We are human beings and interacting by speaking, and AI and digital tools can help us to improve the interaction between us and build even global networks in real time. So the brain structure is being supported by artificial intelligence and digital tools, but this is not the whole story. We then move to the middle part of our body, and two elements which we have been discussing last week on Friday in Vienna. The first element here in the middle part is that we looked at our lungs. And we said that the lungs, these are symbols for what we need is not only our brain and our cognitive capabilities, we need fresh air, we need ecosystems. So without nature and without being embedded in stable nature, we cannot survive as a civilization. And on the right-hand side of the middle part, we saw our heart. So the urban brain and the heart, which we have been embedding in our body. And our point here is that maybe in a situation in which we create technologies which are so good in the cognitive dimension, producing knowledge, maybe in this situation, what makes us really unique as a species is our heart, our soul, our social competences, our empathy, our capabilities to be solidaric. So making this a stronger point of our development concepts, going beyond the classical concepts of the Enlightenment era, could be something which might be of importance. Then we look at the third part of our body, and we have two sides here. The first one is on the left-hand side, the invisible hands of the market. And this is a decision-making tool which is being shaped now. K1, you will talk about this, I think, by digital tools themselves. We have new types of markets which are emerging. And in addition to that, we are working on automated decision-making systems driven by data and availability and analysis of data. So this is also a kind of invisible hand, which we need to understand very well to control it. On the right-hand side, we have what we call in this context, we are shaping as human beings with our decisions, implementation, decision-making processes. This is governance. This is how we intervene in markets, how we shape our societies. And of course, AI and digital opportunities and innovations might help us to become much better in this field. I talked about the leverage points for change, but as you can, as an overall picture here, see, we try to combine these different elements of what we then call human-centered based artificial intelligence and AI-supported progress towards sustainable development goals. And this was my last reflection in this regard. And I'm handing over to Leila first and Keivan then for the reflections on the economy and the energy in urban systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dirk. It's a lot food for thoughts and discussion. And I already see that people start to putting the question, which is brilliant. And others also feel free to add the questions and also vote for the best question. And then we will ask first. So Keivan, floor is yours. And we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Leila. First of all, of the opportunity to speak here at the Urban Hub, the first seminar series, and also to Dirk for this fantastic presentation, summarizing so many things that we discussed actually in the last meeting. So I will try to add a little bit my perspective. Perhaps when Dirk has said it all, so I will try to say a few things in my own, perhaps in my own language. Can you see or no? Probably not. I think I should probably switch the display, and now you probably see the slide, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I wanted to perhaps look at the importance of digitalization for accelerating systems transformations, also coming from the perspective of the nexus between energy and climate, as Dirk mentioned it, but go a little bit perhaps beyond this as well. So if you think about the challenge ahead, it's not only that we need a very deep and fundamental structural transformation of our economy, we need to achieve this also in a very rapid way. So just as a reminder, there is a large fraction of the population in the world is still lacking access to some of the basic services. We need to, in order to achieve the Paris Agreement goals, we need to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and achieve net zero greenhouse gases by around 2050. A range of technologies have been identified, and also behavioral changes and lifestyle changes that can support this transition. And we know also that we really need to invest into support infrastructures and low carbon options in order to achieve this. And Dirk mentioned this already, but I think one of the really fundamental roles of digitalization, besides of course being able to fundamentally change the way that we provide energy services, is also that it has a big potential to accelerate the transition so that we can achieve those targets in time. And if you think about the various different entry points here, and there's the seminal paper that looked into the role of digitalization, particularly in the sense of disruptive end-user innovations by Charlie Wilson and colleagues. And one thing that many of those end-use innovations have in common is that basically digitalization helps us to move away from the current ownership-focused type of service provisioning system to one where more usership and the quality of the service is in the focus, and where digitalization helps us to move to new provisioning systems where sharing plays a more important role. And this is happening because digitalization allows us to move away from individual technologies, optimized technologies, to a new connected and digitally integrated system where different devices know from each other, and where sharing of devices can actually lead to an energy service, to mobility service, or service in households, which is qualitatively better than the system which is currently based on the idea that every individual person owns basically every device. And this has to do, of course, a lot with thinking about the end use in a part, how demand is structured. So what you can see here basically is that there's a whole host of different digital innovations that can help us to integrate, for example, renewable energies better into our daily life. The red end-use innovations are those which help us, for example, to manage the devices in a more optimal way. And I would say perhaps the most important part is actually the blue innovations highlighted here, where digitalization can help us to share mobility, but also to integrate private mobility better with public mobility. So new mobility services that integrate different modes in a way. And digital innovation helps us then to use those services by information being available about where cars are, how you use them, how they are connected to public transport. And most of those innovations are the demand side innovations with a big lever on changing also the supply, reducing fossil fuel inputs and also material inputs into the system. For that, we need urgently market reforms and also enhanced data availability to basically provide business models. And here, cities, of course, play a very important role because they are the demand centers of the world. So demands are decided in cities, and that's why the digitalization and changing those service systems are so important. And that's why also the study that we do together with Dirk and colleagues is focusing on cities. Let me give you perhaps an example about orders of magnitude. So this is not one of the case study cities, actually. This is Dublin. But Dublin and a study by ITF, where an analysis shows that if you take the current infrastructure in Dublin, and you would be able to better share, particularly the privately owned vehicles, you only need 2% of the current infrastructure and of the vehicles to provide the same type of mobility than what Dublin is doing nowadays. There are many co-benefits. If one would switch to a new mobility system where only 2% of cars are on the streets, you would need to drive less, and that's more than 1/3 of the passenger kilometers can be avoided. 1/3 of the emissions can be avoided. But I would consider even the co-benefits of avoided congestions and also freeing up space might be the most important co-benefit for cities, because the space that they avoid any car that is shared is not standing in front of your house. So greening of cities becomes more easily possible because space is freed, and particularly social interactions become also possible by sharing devices, and also access to devices become more easily possible, because you don't need the capital to buy a car. You rent it when you need it. So capital intensity of the service is also lower. In a sense, it means digitalization, what it enables is that we can move away from the old thinking that we have individual devices where we have to improve the efficiency as much as possible, to new integrated systems and new devices that basically enable integration across various different aspects. And the mobile phone is a good example for this. So the mobile phone basically is not only a service to communicate to doesn't only provide the service to communicate to each other, but it replaces a huge number of different other devices and applications. If you use a mobile phone, you can make financial transactions without needing to go to a bank. And to that, this digital integration, we don't only reduce the energy which is needed for those services, but also the energy that is needed to build all those devices. Building one mobile phone is obviously much less energy intensive than building all those other devices together. So in a summary, on the positive side, digitalization can help us to accelerate system change, improve system efficiency, enhance service quality, improve the access, and also improve the environmental performance of the system. On the other side of the coin, I think there are also trade-offs of digitalization. So in order to really harvest all the benefits and the power of digitalization would need to be managed very carefully. So with digitalization, we can enhance the planetary stability by improving the efficiency of the system, but digitalization comes with lots of new services that might be created as well. And there could be new services which are really disruptive to energy use. I'm not only talking about data services and computing that needs energy, but think about AI solutions and drones that can be used in an AI mode, where in the future our children would, instead of taking a bus, quickly jump on their own private drone and go to the kindergarten. And this would be, from an energy perspective, a quite disruptive and dystopian future for if you think about the climate consequences of that. Digitalization can help us also to enhance equity by providing access to many, many different services in a much, much easier way. But it can also increase inequity because there's only a limited number of actors which actually control digital technology and also benefit from the innovation. The productivity increases, and we need to make sure that the benefits are also societal, help to achieve common objectives. And for this, we need new rules on how to do this. And perhaps most importantly, if you think about the current geopolitical situation, digitalization can increase political agency by making information available to people, by allowing people to participate more easily in processes that they generally enhance democracy. But the digitalization can also has given us tools to most effectively also manipulate and try to influence consumers, influence voters, and reduce political agency by creating bubbles and echo chambers. And I think you see some of that happening at the moment. So also there we need to find new roles and ways how we deal with digitalization. Just from the same study, just to show you a few of the challenges. Obviously, the ICT capacity is not distributed evenly across the world. It's particularly in the rich countries of the north, and we need to carefully think about how to create this capacity also in the south, simply from the perspective of fairness and also the justice of the transformation, and also distributing the benefits of this new technology. But very importantly, perhaps also we need to think about how to move to a system with more heterogeneous data providers and structures. Generally, monopolistic data platforms interact with the users. On the one hand, they provide a new service that the users want to have, but at the same time, if the data providers are concentrated in a few hands, you run the risks that you have that the data provider also exerts some behavioral control and also uses its position in the market to influence political digital agency, what I mentioned before that. So I want perhaps to conclude with this figure, which is a figure by Felix Kreuzig and colleagues, and which basically shows us a few important milestones that we need to achieve in order to make this transition people-centered, as also Dirk was emphasizing. So we need to identify rules for data sharing and incentivize feedback mechanisms so that digitalization is becoming more democratic. We need to create the structures and infrastructures that are necessary. We need to share common goals, and goals which are basically geared towards using digitalization to manage and to provide better access to common goods. And then at the end, this will also influence the mindsets and help people to participate in a more equitable, and I would argue, a more green planet if we can use digitalization in the right way. Well, thank you. This was my last slide.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Keivan and Dirk, for great presentation. A lot to digest, and I'm really looking forward for a great conversation. So we have a couple of questions. I'm going to read it out because also we are recording for the YouTube for future, so that would be great to do it. We have a question from Thomas Berger that will technology save us? To me, this sounds very much like supply side oriented technology push measures. According to your understanding, to what extent do you think such a technology push will also support a required major behavior change with respect to the consumption, mobility, and etc.? So feel free to answer, one of you, maybe give some inputs. That would be great. Yeah, Dirk, please.
Yeah. When you can breathe for a second, and then you add to what we have been focusing on both is that we see opportunity spaces. I found it fascinating how you, Keivan, looked at the demand side of things, because very often we have a supply side perspective, We think about new infrastructures, new devices, new machines, etc. But what you are showing is that the way how we interact as societies with infrastructures and devices might change fundamentally. And many examples into this direction. Not of this will come automatically. We have to produce the right incentive schemes for that. And this would be my first answer. My second answer is what also has been highlighted by Kewan at the very end. I mean, we see these opportunities of these technologies to organize our energy systems, our social systems, our decision-making processes in a better, more efficient, more data and therefore knowledge-based way than ever before. So really incredible tools on the one hand side. And then on the dark side of that, incredible risks, which we also need to have in mind to avoid those. No? And Kewan mentioned all of that. Also for me, there are 4 very big risks which we have to have in mind, and at the same time work for the good opportunities we talked about. And these 4 risks are deep fake and misinformation. This is a risk for our democracies. Then it is about losing control over machines. So how do we use and interact with automated decision-making systems is number 2, because this is about human agency. And number 3 is the power concentration on the economic side. I mean, a handful of big companies are controlling the market. An even smaller handful of countries are heavily investing in this field. Others don't. The great majority does not. And then on the political risk side, there are also authoritarian regimes which could use these kind of mechanisms for controlling people much better than ever in history before. No? And the last risk which I'm seeing is what I'm discussing under the term of hybridity, how we interact as humans with technological systems. So think about the interface between brains and algorithms. This is something which might move forward in the near future already. So how for this we also need, as you said at the end, Kewan, we need goals for that. No? So how far would we like to go? How would we imagine our future? So these are very fundamental questions on the dark side of the story and on the bright side of the story. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Kevin, before giving to you, I will add one more question which is also relevant, and maybe you can combine these two together. So the question is from Mikhail Serenko, is just saying that what citizens' role was in defining its component and basically digitalization component and their role in it. What is a design top-down? Basically, I mean, how we can integrate more citizens toward this process of the transformation in way of the digitalization.
Yeah, that's also a very relevant question. Perhaps before going there, let me add one observation on the will technology solve it all question that Dirk already, I think, very nicely responded to. I think digitalization, as any other technology, the choices that we make depend on the one hand, of course, on the infrastructure, technology, environment, and the choices that we can make. And digitalization will increase the choice space there. So we will be able to use technologies in a different way because of digitalization, allowing us to better understand the connections between the different technologies. But on the other hand, this might look actually quite different in different social contexts with different social norms. And individual preferences and choices might also mean that digitalization will not lead to the same outcomes everywhere in the world. Yeah, so I can imagine that ironically, in countries in developing world, for example, where car sharing is very common, or sharing in general is very common, the aspiration is to move to a system where you have your own one, right? So it is more difficult to explain some of the benefits of digitalization in today's developing world than the rich economies, which also where basically people start to say, okay, actually, I don't need the SUV in front of my house. It's not anymore the the determining factor for how my neighbors see me. Actually, it might be a stigma in the future, I would say near future. So I think how we use digital technology will depend also on the social norms and the social innovations that are consistent with the preferences of different people. Now I forgot your second question. What was that? Or did I answer it half through already?
Yeah, you answered, but basically the main one is that how we can basically increase the role of the citizens in defining or what would be their roles in this transition. So a little bit on the demand side, particularly perspective.
I mean, they play the central role at the end because they demand the services. And they will demand services which are basically qualitatively better and allow them to have a better life. So this is which values the citizens at the end adopt in a system which is very. I see a digital system much more democratic actually as a non-digital system which is based on who has the capital, who can afford what. So I think that the whole while you need to have at the one hand the providers of digital services and who allow this integration, I think whether this will be successful or not will depend on the uptake by people at the end. So I think it's a very people-centric transition that we have ahead of us.
Excellent.
Could I add to the citizen perspective? I would add to what Kiran already said, 3 more elements. The first one is participation is much easier based on digital innovations of the different kinds we talked about. So communicating with each other, building networks, working together. We also said controlling people is an option based on the digital innovations, but participation is number 1. No? The knowledge systems, local ones, is number 2. We saw fascinating infrastructures in China under the label of the urban brain. So where data analysis has been helping to understand what the city actually is about. Where are the resource consumptions coming to? How does the mobility flows look like, et cetera, these kind of knowledge systems, and then access to knowledge systems. This is number 2. And number 4 is that people have the chance to interact directly with decision makers if you organize it well, based on data. No? So governance styles might be much more inclusive than we had it before.
Excellent, thank you. So I will also read one more question. We have a time still. The question is from Anna that human imagination allows for innovation, for beyond extrapolation from previous experience, not just new content, but new ways of thinking, very much needed, which very much needed for sustainable transition. AI very incompletely reflects these aspects of the human intelligence. How can AI add to the information processing without crowding out the advantage of the human cognition?
Well, I like that question a lot, I must say. And I agree with it. I would be a bit more optimistic. So I share that without imagination, we will not get these fundamental transformations towards sustainability done. And I would build my reflection on Immanuel Kant when he looked at the Enlightenment era. No? And he said that the key of the Enlightenment era, and in the Enlightenment era, we invented human rights. We invented step-by-step democracy, rule of law, etc., etc. The basic mechanism of change was, in German, it's die Veränderung der Denkungsart der Menschen. So the shift of thinking, the fundamental shift of thinking of humans. No? So this is what drives change. And technologies might improve that. Technologies might improve our databases, our knowledge, our understanding of systems. I think that based on these new technological systems, Leila, we talked about this last week in Vienna, no? The way we look at the Earth system will be completely different in 10 years from now, because the instruments we are having to monitor the Earth system and dive into the Earth system, visualization, no? Will create new types of imagination which have not been possible beforehand. So I would slightly look a bit more positively on the mechanisms between these new technologies on the one hand side and the fundamental importance of imagination and our mindsets on the other hand side. Adding with the idea that, remember the body which I talked about, which we have been playing around with, no? With this body, we wanted to say that it is not only about our own brain. No, there are other parts of the body and other elements which, in the combination of these elements, tell us something about the future of human-centered development.
Yeah. It's really beautiful how you actually picked up the body discussion that we had and included it in your presentation. It's very, very artfully. And perhaps adding one element here is that I think we can already observe how digitalization have changed the way that we think about things, the way of our thinking. Yeah. So I still grew up in an education system where it was fundamental to repeat things, to be able to memorize things as a very important skill. This has no relevance anymore. You have access to information everywhere. So it is really wasted energy to try to memorize everything. It is the way that it is about understanding how can you get access to reliable information that you can then use and combine with the brain power of the human and create something new. So creativity is basically, I think it's a liberation of creativity, what we see with digitalization nowadays. We need to understand how to, so we are a little bit in the wild west still. So we need to understand and create rules to make sure that quality of information is visible and labeled for people. And this is a very, I think this is a very difficult transformation. We have not fully understood yet how to do that, and we need to do this internationally, on everybody together, because otherwise we will have our own, little corners where everybody has access to information, but to alternative informations perhaps. And this would of course be have negative consequences for society.
Perfect. So actually, following up of all these great things that you presented, also there, particularly these body parts, and then also is follow-up in Keivan's presentation, the aspects of the equity. I think what comes in my mind very much, and is really close to my heart, is basically is that how different urban design, particularly when we are talking about the cities and infrastructure, impact on that. For example, why I'm saying that, coming from the developing countries, and when I move to Europe and I see how much vulnerable groups of people, for example, like people with disabilities and etc., are very much involved in a city, which we are seeing less this type of people in the cities in the developing countries, because we have facilities to engage them in the cities life and etc. And my worriness about the digitalization and etc., based on the case studies also we visit in Europe, is that going toward this digitalization, there is a risk that we are keeping some people behind, like old generation, that they have a less information about the digitalization and then how they are integrating with the smart cities and etc. So I'm really happy that you brought these also aspects in the board, that we do need a lot of ways to kind of make sure that no one is stayed behind. And also for me is that in each city or in each different urban development, digitalization makes different sense, and then in the different ways that we are going. And this transformation phase is really important, that we are sometimes in some countries, they are switching immediately, and that's why people has some issues, but we have this gradual transformation to make sure that everyone is going at the same time, or at least in the same speed. Mm-hmm. So one more question. Actually, this is more on basically our studies. Maybe I'm looking to Dirk maybe to answer from Carl, that to what extent does this study assess current digital infrastructure, and based on that, what data sets does this assessment belong on? Basically, how we did this assessment and then how we assess this current digital infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can a little bit explain on our project.
Yeah, I would like to combine the last question with your former question, Leila,
Sure.
because things came to my mind. The two reflections, brief ones. And the first one is that this related to your inclusiveness and how should urban design actually look like. We need to have clear ideas what we are aiming actually for. And to do this right, we need goals. And to do this right, we need indicator systems. And in the study, we do a lot work on indicator systems, different ones, to learn from those about how we can describe progress in the smart and sustainable way based on these indicator systems as learning tools. No? What we saw, for example, when I'm comparing German experiences and Chinese experiences, no? Germany is very weak in digital infrastructures. We need much more investments in that, much more progress in that. We are lagging behind. No? China is very strong in digital infrastructures in cities, which we saw, high investments, interesting priorities. What we also saw is that we have in Germany so many inclusiveness and sustainability indicators in our cities, but we are lagging the tools, the technological ones, to improve those. In China, the other way around. They have fantastic urban brains, no, on the one hand side, but there is no indicator system to actually understand what we have been doing with all these tools during the last 6, 7, 8 years, because the urban brain pilots in China are existing since 2016, but there is no empirical material what this has been changing, into which direction. No? So this is one. And the second thing I wanted to highlight very quickly, because I like the way, Leila, you framed urban attractiveness. No, there are studies which are showing that in attractive cities, people are using the city. So people are moving out of their homes. They are moving into the city. They are going to city events, etc., etc. No? If you look into cities which are not attractive, people stay at home. They leave their homes to go to work. To bring their children to school because it might be insecure. No, but then they are staying at home. And this is not only something which is related to urban lifestyles and all of this kind of important elements of human well-being, it's also related to democracy. Because if people don't leave their homes because the cities are so unattractive, they don't meet any longer. And they don't meet between the different parts of our societies. So attractiveness of cities is so fundamental for well-being and the future of democracy.
Excellent, thank you. So we just have 3 minutes left. I would like to ask each of you with 1 minute, just as a final remarks, and then maybe key points that you want to bring it to the audience and also future audience, because this will record it and save it in YouTube. So please, Kayvon, maybe you can start, and then Dirk, please.
Yeah, first of all, let me perhaps repeat my appreciation that we have this discussion, so that basically the urban research agenda is really strengthened at IIASA, and I think there's scientifically a lot of homework still to do to understand, given different city typologies and also different preferences of people with different cultural contexts, what does this digitalization mean in the different cities, and try to represent this perhaps better in our tools at IIASA. I would say that's a very important aspect. That our future will be driven by digitalization. I think there is no question about that. The question is in which direction it goes and how we can govern this transition to lead us into a better world, to enable a better world, if you want, where some of the challenges that I mentioned at the beginning, from poverty eradication to climate change, I think digitalization can help to achieve those goals.
Dirk, please.
Yeah, very quick, 3 sentences. The first one, I like the Wild West term which you used, Kayvon. So a lot of conceptual work is still needed. This is something which I'm taking away from our discussion today also. The second element is that what we saw is that these two communities, the sustainability community on the one hand side, the digital crowd on the other hand side, there is still a lot of work needed to bring this in an integrated way together. We have to learn from each other. There's so much. And we saw this in the cities themselves. No? So the digital teams in the cities, the climate teams in the city, they might in isolation be excellent and very, very good. But the combination, understanding each other, a lot of work to do still. No? And my last one and third idea, I mean, multilateral cooperation is under stress. And any kind of climate neutrality strategy needs global cooperation. And therefore, I'm so grateful for the global network, which we have been building together, Leila and Keywan, IIASA and others, for this study. You know, this in itself is, I think, very important. Thank you. And thank you very much, Leila, for your fantastic input.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, it was my great pleasure that opening this series with you two that are always, I'm learning a lot from both of you. And I'm so happy that you accepted to be as an opening of this series. From the audience, also thanks a lot for your engaging in this discussion and listening to us. And two things. One, actually, this report, hopefully by end of this year, beginning of next year, will be published. So stay tuned. And we will put it also in our website. You can go through it and read our report. And the second one is that we are aiming to follow up in this series. So stay tuned for the next interesting topic coming up. And we are just going for picking important or hot topics going around and bringing people in discussion. And yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.